want to introduce Rabbi Koppell, who many of you know very well, a local rabbi in town in Phoenix. Claim to a good name is something that's very important and supersedes anything else. But what Rabbi Koppell is going to share about today is 38 years serving our country. And in my research, as I was creating the little bio, I wouldn't even call it a bio, but our little blurb that we include in the email, I found, and Rabbi Koppell can correct me if I'm incorrect, that there are so few female chaplains in the U.S. Armed Forces, and for sure so few Jewish chaplains. In fact, I think I read that at a certain point, there were only 2 female chaplains in the U.S. Armed Forces that were Jewish. So Rabbi Koppell can share about that, or it might not be part of her presentation. But I do want to pass the mic and allow Rabbi Koppell to share her story, how she...
Good, wonderful, welcome, and thank you all for joining us. I want to say a special hi to my mom, who's zooming in from New York. Hi, Mom. Yes, I joined the U.S. Army in 1978. In fact, it's coming up on the anniversary. It was the 22nd of May. They call it your pay entry basic date. So I was writing that date, 22 May 1978, for my whole career, so that's why it's so familiar. I was then a rabbinical student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia, and unbeknownst to me, there had never been a female rabbi in the U.S. military. So it became, quite an ordeal to figure out how I was going to make that happen. So here's me early on in my career in the field. I'm holding up there a little tiny box of bottle of Tabasco sauce, which they include with all of the MREs, the meals ready to eat. So I joined the Army as a chaplain candidate. And then in 1981, I graduated from rabbinical school, and what should have been then a pro forma switch from chaplain candidate to chaplain actually became a 7 or 8 year, I wouldn't say battle, but controversy. The Jewish chaplains are all coordinated, or were at that time, by the Jewish Welfare Board, which was made up of Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox rabbis working together. And the challenge became the conservative and Orthodox rabbis really didn't want to put a hechsher on the idea of a female rabbi at that time. So they had to figure out how they were going to endorse me for the military chaplaincy, which was a requirement of the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army, while they were keeping their integrity of not putting their imprimatur on female rabbis. So what happened was that it took all of that time for the Jewish Welfare Board to figure out a process. So it wasn't actually until about 1985, I think, that I finally got the title of chaplain, not chaplain candidate. But that's me as a very young, I was still a chaplain candidate. You could tell by the insignia that I'm wearing there. That's not the, so yeah, so there I am as a very young second lieutenant chaplain candidate. So I did then join. You could see I'm a major here. I was a young mom with 2 kids. I got married in 1985. And in fact, my beloved husband, Alav HaShalom, passed away 5 years ago today. His actual yard site is Rosh Chodesh coming up, but it was May 19th. But we had 29 beautiful years together, and he supported my career. I wasn't as actively involved with my military service, but I was serving as a unit chaplain here and supporting my my soldiers. This is actually taken at March Air Force Base. Let's see, Team Spirit 1993. So we were on our way to South Korea for a 3-week exercise. I was the chaplain of the 164th Corps Support Group. and we were going for an exercise called the Team Spirit to South Korea. And I don't think I have the photo here, but one of the highlights of that trip was I got to go from our base, outside of Yeonamsville in South Korea, outside Camp Humphreys. I got to travel to Seoul for Purim, where the rabbi in Seoul had koshered the kitchen at the Seoul Hilton, and we had a Purim celebration. They are very memorable. This is at another field exercise from that time period. This is a kind of important, iconic photo. So I was just, saying Havdalah, at the end of Shabbos, and one of my colleagues snapped this picture. It happens to be, if you go to the Museum of American Jewish Military History in Washington, D.C., they have this photo. And here I am again out in the field. That's with a colleague. And there's my two beautiful daughters who now, Jessie in the blue dress, now teaches Jewish studies at Pardes Jewish Day School. She's almost 34 and a mother of two. And the little one, Sarah, is now finishing up her medical residence and also has two beautiful children. But they were always very supportive of my career. You really can't be in the Army Reserve or in the Army period without family support. And I remember the first year Jessie was away at college, she went to Kenyon College in Ohio, and I was offered the opportunity to go to Afghanistan during the winter break for Hanukkah. And I called Jessie and I said, what would you like me to do? I'd like to go to Afghanistan, but it means I'll miss your entire school break, your first break, your first time home from your first semester of college. And she said, they need you more than I do. So I thought that was very beautiful. And the kids love to dress up in the clothes. So there's Sarah, I must have been packing for something. And there's Jessie. You gotta love the matzah box in the background, right? Storing the art supplies. And this is interesting. So this was some of my students in my temple growing up, and 11 kids, including the little boy in the red shirt there, ended up going into the military. 10 of them Army, one of them Air Force. And I can't help but think it was somewhat the influence of seeing their rabbi once a month come to Sunday school in uniform. So there's a lesson there on tefillin. So this is from my very first trip to Iraq, which was in April of 2005. I was going for Passover, and I was very, very tired after a long trip here. So I spent like a couple of weeks at Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort, the name is eluding me now, in El Paso, Texas, at Fort Bliss. And then got all mobed up, went to Kuwait. You don't go anywhere in the Middle East without first going to Kuwait. That's the distribution point. All of the traffic goes to Kuwait, whether it's by military transport or whether it's by a commercial charter. And then from there you get on your military flight. And I got turned over to a group of Marines who actually put me on the wrong plane. And I ended up, instead of in Baghdad, where I was supposed to be going for Passover to officiate at the first Seder, I ended up at El Assad, which was a couple of 100 miles to the west. And I was just beside myself because there were no flights that were going where I needed to go to get me in time for the first Seder. And here I had spent all of this time, 12 days at Fort Bliss, getting mobed up, getting ready to go. And now I was going to miss the Seder. And, really, by divine intervention, this Sergeant Major took charge of me. He knew there was a medical flight going to where I needed to go that afternoon. And then the winds were too high, the helicopter wasn't going. But here I am, they finally put me on this helicopter, and I was going to get to Baghdad in time for the Seder. And sure enough, I got there 2 hours before the Seder. I got to shower, put on a clean uniform, and this is what Pesach looks like when you're deployed in the Army. You could be very proud of your tax dollars in action. Not only do we have kosher MREs, meals ready to eat, but kosher for Passover MREs, nice little Seder plate with foil packets of charoset. Instead of 4 cups of wine, you get 4 juice boxes. The soldiers in the combat theater are not allowed to have wine or any alcohol. They get 2 beers for Super Bowl, that's it. But they can have wine for religious purposes. So I was very proud of myself. I got one bottle of wine past the Kuwaiti customs. This is a Seder at Forward Operating Base Taji, where it was kind of rugged circumstances. The soldiers told me, though, they would lick the inside of that wine bottle. They were so happy to have a little taste of wine. We only had power for about half of this Seder. The lights, the generator kept going off. I told them we were reenacting the Plague of Darkness. And here I happened to be in Iraq for Mother's Day. So this is at Forward Operating Base Taji in the boneyard, all these captured Iraqi weapons. And somebody had, I didn't do that graffiti, but I happened to see that. So I took a picture. I sent that to the kids. Again, missed Mother's Day that year. But so this is overlooking the Tigris River. You see me next to that big weapon. Chaplains, interestingly, are considered non-combatants. So you'll never see a picture of me holding a weapon. I always had a chaplain assistant who traveled with me and acted as my bodyguard. And it's an interesting thing. So chaplains have a different status according to the Geneva Convention. The challenge, of course, is in the contemporary strategic environment. We're not fighting enemies that abide by the Geneva Convention, but even so, we're not allowed to have a weapon. We have the chaplain assistant, and they are, in effect, our weapon. So every soldier who went to Baghdad has this picture sitting in Saddam Hussein's throne. And this is no big deal to us in Phoenix. We see haboobs all the time. This is one of my favorite all-time photos. So this is at the presidential palace. Saddam Hussein had many, many palaces around the country and even just around Baghdad, but this was the big presidential palace. So here are some of our fine American soldiers. They're just enjoying a few minutes of sun, but you have to notice that they've got their protective vests and they've got their weapons. So, if an alert goes off, they're all ready to throw their vest on and grab their weapon, right over their bikini. This picture is very meaningful to me because you remember that this was the first time when Iraqis were allowed to have free elections. And the way they made sure people didn't vote more than once was after you voted, you put your finger in the blue ink so you couldn't vote again. And here they are proudly displaying their fingers that they voted. This picture was taken at Abu Ghraib prison right at that time when everything was kind of blowing up there. So they were very, very demoralized. These were the three people who identified as Jews at Abu Ghraib. But, I went and visited them for Passover, and, just so meaningful to them that, a rabbi would schlep all the way across the world to come visit with them and bring them a little bit of the holiday. And there was a female soldier at Forward Operating Base Taji who memorably said to me, it almost feels like home. And the beautiful thing about our tradition is that, you'd have a major sitting next to a private at the Seder table. And normally those two people would never interact. But because we have this tradition in common and these experiences in common, that just bridged any gap of rank that might have kept people apart. And just, you know, singing Dayenu, opening the door for Elijah, these were things that broke down barriers. And every place I went, everybody thought they were the only Jew there. So it was, you know, just so touching to them. And one of the gratifying things about being a chaplain was being able to plant the seeds of a community by bringing the people together. I was only there for a couple of days, but then I could leave behind a group of people who were connected to each other. So that's a shot, you know, from a helicopter looking down at that presidential palace. So this is, again, this is in Mosul, home of the prophet Jonah. And again, just a couple of Jews there. And you see that there's a female colonel, another colonel here. She's a physician, and this guy can't see his rank, but I think he's a specialist. So these are, you know, two disparate ranks coming together to have Passover. Now, this is at the forward operating base Q West, also in Iraq. Just a funny sign. So as I said, the US forces are not allowed to drink, but the coalition partners are. So like the Brits, the Poles, are other people. So the MPs would walk around and look at your ID if they saw that you had an alcoholic drink, to check to make sure you were authorized to have that, but no drinking while armed. Now this is Afghanistan. I mean, that's just an incredible reminder of the blessing of how we live our lives compared to how people in other parts of the world live. And so this is Hanukkah in Afghanistan. I got to go twice to Afghanistan for Hanukkah. This young lady, Lindsay Wallace, lives here in Phoenix. She's a West Point grad. I don't know if any of you know her or her family. Bob and Ellen Wallace are her parents. Her grandfather called me up the day before I was leaving. This is so amazing. He says, "So I hear you're going to Afghanistan. You know, my daughter is there. My granddaughter, could you look her up?" And I'm thinking, you know, it's a big country, and look up your granddaughter. But I dutifully wrote down her name and her unit, and I remembered the first name, Lindsay. So I land in Kandahar, Afghanistan. They take me immediately to this office building where there's a particular unit where there are two Jewish women, this young lady and Sergeant Berliga here, and sit me down with these two Jewish soldiers. And we start talking. I have not unpacked, you know, I haven't done anything. And this young lady starts talking to me, and I couldn't remember the last name or the unit. I said, "Is your first name Lindsay?" "Yes." So here I was on this mission to, you know, from her grandfather to say hello. The first person I sit down with in Afghanistan is Lindsay Wallace. Sergeant Berliga has a beautiful story. She and her twin sister were raised in the former Soviet Union under communist government. And after the government fell, Chabad came to their community. They opened a day school. She had the benefit of that education, and the family was able to come to the US, and they were so grateful for the opportunity in this country that she and her twin sister joined the military, US military. This was a humanitarian mission, giving clothing to some of the kids in the neighborhood. And you'll notice that I have my Jewish chaplain's insignia covered on the helmet, because we were going into the town, and the Jewish chaplain's insignia, if you notice in some of the pictures, has the tablets of the 10 Commandments and a Magen David. And it was considered that, you know, it might not be so safe to go into a village in Afghanistan with this big giant Jewish thing on. So I just covered it with a piece of paper. This was another extraordinary opportunity I had in between trips to Iraq and Afghanistan, trip to the White House. And this is in the Roosevelt room with President George W. Bush. So he had invited at Hanukkah time Jewish leaders from oppressed countries around the world so he could get an update on the situation for the Jewish community in various countries. And I was invited to give the opening prayer at this meeting. And I want you to know, I did not set myself up at the head of this table. You know, as you could imagine, the staff had place cards where everybody should sit. And, but I love that it looks like it's my meeting. And, you know, it's so nice that the president could, you know, be there at my meeting. And then that evening was the Hanukkah ball. And my husband had a cold. He didn't want to come to the ball. So I called my mother up, who is on this Zoom with us. I said, you know, can you get to the White House? I'm allowed to bring a guest to this event. Do you want to come? My mom was working as a bookkeeper then, and whatever, it was like not the convenient time of the month with bookkeepers. It's the beginning of the month, the end of the month, you know, they all have these certain things, but she made time to come to the White House with me. So there we are. And this is just a sign for one of the events. This is so cute, you know, that these soldiers, they're big, tough guys, but you know, you put a dreidel and some gelt in front of them and they're just, you know, they're just nice Jewish boys and girls. And here they are. So it was Hanukkah, but one of the things I did, this was at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. I wanted to clean up the Jewish supply kit closet a little bit. So I was cleaning up and they found all the shofarot. So of course, you know, they couldn't resist playing with the shofarot. And the kids at Temple Chai Religious School made cards. So every night I would give them cards. And so there they are showing their cards. This is just walking around at Bagram Airfield. These are French winter soldiers. So these are like really tough guys. They go on snowshoes in the mountains of Afghanistan in the winter to like take the fight to the enemy. But we all just thought they're special berets for their special unit, you know. But we just thought those berets were so out of control and so funny. So I asked to take a picture with them. Just we called them pizza boards, those berets. So here's just another another Seder. You know what? One of the things in the Army is, you know, you do Seder. It's not just two Seders. You do, you know, you fly to one place, you do a Seder, and so you don't always have the holiday on exactly the right date. You have the holiday when the rabbi finally gets to your location. And same thing with Hanukkah. I tease them, you know, it's the 12th night of Hanukkah, it's the 15th night of Hanukkah. And this is after the Seder. I like this shot. So those are some of the emirs of Kuwait. This is in Kuwait. And I'm sure they would have loved to know that we were having a Seder in this room with them. I put this picture in just because I like, you know, you can see how much fun I'm having. And then this is an award I got recently. This is kind of a cool photo. So this is me and Christy Moeller, who's a Christian chaplain. And we were giving a blessing to General Dunwoody. I think she's the first 4-star female general in the Army. So that was another cool thing. And then one of the other great things I got to do was go to the U.S. Army War College, and where I earned a master's in strategic studies. And I thought you might be interested in some of the topics that we studied as part of that curriculum. Very, very challenging and competitive program. I think we started off with about 450 students and about 350 graduated. So, you know, it tells you a little bit about the rigor of the program. But there I am at graduation. And one of the traditions at the War College is that the graduating class commissions a painting that we then donate to this school. And it happened to be the 150th anniversary of Gettysburg when I was there. So that was the painting that we donated to the school. And if you look carefully on the wall behind me, that every member of the graduating class also gets a print of that painting. So that's what I have on the wall behind me. And that's my, so I continue to serve now on the Jewish Welfare Boards, has a chaplain's council that still continues to manage the chaplain operations. So I have my toes still in the water of the military. So a few times a year we meet. There are 4 conservative, 4 Orthodox, and 4 Reform representatives who comprise the Jewish Welfare Board plenum. And so there I am. I'm in civilian clothes because I'm not serving anymore, but I get to go and still interact a little bit with the military. I chair the Reform Movement's delegation to this board. And then this is something that just happened last year. I was inducted into the Army Women's Foundation Hall of Fame. So that was an unexpected thing that just happened. And as they say in the Army, subject to your questions, this concludes my portion of the brief.
Thank you so much. If anyone does have a question, there are 2 ways, of course, to ask. One of them is through the chat. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of questions. And the other way is to unmute your mic. So we can definitely allow that. While we are waiting for people to, oh, I see someone. Sheldon, you have a question?
Yes, Rabbi, did you experience any anti-Semitism from anyone in Afghanistan or the other soldiers?
I did not at that point in my career. You know, first of all, I was a colonel when I was doing those travels, which is, you know, pretty high rank in the Army. So if anybody had anything to say, you know, they were going to keep their mouths shut.
Okay, thank you.
Morty, did you have a question?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Rabbi, you had a very interesting life, and Yasher Koyach for that. You did a good job. I really enjoyed you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was an honor and such a unique opportunity.
Rabbi Koppell, you have 2 questions in the chat. Would you prefer that I read them, or did you want to read them?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay, so one of them was, first of all, she wrote, fascinating. And were you ever in harm's way?
Oh, sure. Well, you know, in Afghanistan and Iraq, for sure, you know, those places got shelled on a regular basis. I did mostly, you know, the Army was very interested in protecting me. So I flew everywhere I went, which was less of a risk than you would face in a convoy. But I did one time do a convoy in Iraq just because the convoy was leaving at 9 in the morning, and the flight wasn't until that night, and I was bored. I wanted to get where I was going, so I did that convoy. You know, I was at Abu Ghraib, as I said, at a time that was, you know, very seriously under fire. And in fact, so much so that my chaplain assistant who was with me, they tried to put us in rooms that were separated from each other by a courtyard. And that was a place where you couldn't be outdoors without the full battle rattle with the Kevlar helmet and the protective vest and the weapon. And he said, you know, how am I supposed to protect her when I'm 5 minutes away and across an open courtyard? And he actually laid his sleeping bag down on the floor next to my cot and slept there with his M16 so that he would keep me safe. When I was in Mosul, they did get rocketed while I was there, but, you know, fortunately, you know, the worst I suffered was that it woke me up.
Thank God. Alan Malk, did you have a question?
I actually had a comment. I happen to belong to Rabbi Koppell's shul, Temple High, and I have been kind of bugging her to write a book about her life. And having seen this incredible slideshow, that is just further affirmation that if she hasn't started to get cracking on this, she should. It would be just a spectacular book. That was just my
I appreciate that, Dr. Malk.
We need to get you a ghostwriter.
Yeah.
Here are some more questions in the chat.
Okay.
What led you into the Army initially?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, near what was then the chaplain school at Fort Hamilton. It was on the Brooklyn side of the Verrazano Bridge. I don't know how many of you know that spot, right? So every time we drove by, I would see the insignia of the chaplain school there, and I always wondered about it. And I had what I would call a calling to be a rabbi from a very young age. My parents tell me that I was 11 years old the first time I said I wanted to be a rabbi. So, and that was, I was 11 years old in 1967. So there were no female rabbis at that point. So I don't know where I got that idea, but I was the one kid in Hebrew school who loved Hebrew school and loved junior congregation. And it just seemed very natural to me. So knowing that I wanted to be a rabbi and seeing this chaplain school, those two things kind of got planted a seed in my mind that I always wondered, gee, I wonder if I'll have a chance to find out what goes on there. Then in 1978, at my rabbinical school, I started rabbinical school in 76. I see a recruiting poster on a bulletin board at the top of a staircase, basically Uncle Sam wants you. And I thought, well, here's my chance. So I began the process. What do I need to do? I had to go to the chaplain officer basic course for 6 weeks in the summer. It paid basically the same thing as 6 weeks of teaching Jewish kids to swim, which is what I usually did in the summer. So I thought, well, here's my big chance. And then learned that I was the first female to come into this program. So then when I met and married my husband, David, when he found out, because, I was not that engaged with it. And he said, wait a minute, you can't quit. You have to do a good job. You have to make this look good, because otherwise everybody's going to point a finger and say, oh, see, women can't do this because they, they don't stick with it, So that was it, 38 years. 38 years, achieved the rank of colonel, graduated the Army War College. So I think I made it look good for women rabbis.
Definitely. Another question in the chat. Does the military have a rabbi on call at Arlington Cemetery?
Absolutely.
On call?
Yes.
Okay.
For sure.
So Paula, that's your answer. Any other questions? There's a comment that said you don't need a ghostwriter. I should take that back. Any other questions, or maybe, and while we're up, Morty, did you have another question?
I think somebody has got to wake up Rosalind Peller. She's fast asleep.
Oh, I'm not worried about that. You don't have to worry about that.
Okay, no. Let's not wake her up. Thank you, Levy, for what you're actually doing for us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank
But
you very much.
before I get my eulogy here, Morty, I want to thank Rabbi Koppell again. And if you are...
Thank you for inviting me. It's so nice.
Oh, our pleasure. I see a couple people unmuted their mics. So is there any last questions?
Yeah, no, Isaac.
Mel, there you go.
Rabbi, I still have your recovery Haggadah, and I treasure it.
I'm so glad.
Mhm.
I think you missed an opportunity to tell them about the time when you opened the door of for Elijah.
Okay, this is my mom. My mom has heard all the war stories. She could give this talk. So yes, so that was a moment. I can't remember. We were in Iraq. I forgot where we were. We were in Iraq, and they put us for Seder in a container right behind the headquarters building, surrounded by barbed wire, but just to make sure that it was very safe. And we started the Seder, in this small little containerized unit, and went around the table, introduced ourselves, and one of the sergeants said, I'm glad we're here behind closed doors for our own safety. So that was good. So that's how we started the Seder. So then it came time to open the door for Elijah. And I'm thinking, so we're really going to open the door in the, outback of Iraq here and start singing in Hebrew? And I thought, you know what? We're American soldiers. We have freedom of religious expression. we're here celebrating liberation. And sure enough, we opened the door, we sang Eliyahu, and then we're happy to close it real quick after that. But yeah, that was a memorable moment. I can see it. I can't remember the name of the installation where we are.
Was there any other questions? I see a couple unmuted mics.
Yeah, this is
I
Sharon.
would-
This is Sharon Dunn. Yeah,
Ella, you'll go next. Sharon, go for it.
I just want to say thank you. I enjoyed, although I've known you all these years, I didn't know all the details. So this was very interesting.
Well, that's wonderful, Sharon. And I hope I'll see you at Torah study Sunday morning.
I think that I'll try, yeah.
Okay.
All right, now Alla.
First, I want to thank you for the presentation. And it's a big thing for our growth, for our kids, grandkids, granddaughters, to know that they can achieve a lot. They don't have to stay in women's so-called positions anymore. And I have a question for you. Did you have a chance to visit a hospital in the war zone?
I did. And the one thing I was impressed in the hospitals is that in the room right next door to our troops who were there for treatment, in the room next door were enemy fighters who had been wounded, and they were there in the U.S. hospital, right, receiving treatment right next door. So, I thought when we talk about, there's a concept in Jewish tradition of tohar haneshek, purity of arms, and how we conduct war and how we try to retain some sense of humanity in a inhumane situation. So that was very touching to me. My last military assignment, my last 3 years in the Army, was as the command chaplain of the 807th medical command, the largest deployable medical force in the world, 11,000 soldiers spread over 22 states. So headquartered in Fort Douglas, Utah. So I used to go up there all the time those last 3 years, but we had units all over the country. And some of those soldiers have been called to active duty now with this COVID situation. So some soldiers from that unit are serving our fellow citizens around the country right now. And the amazing thing, Alla, is one of the things that always fascinated me about the Army was how self-sustaining the military is. You walk into a field where there's absolutely nothing, and you build a complete self-sustaining world with internet, with food, with showers, and then 2 weeks later, it's gone. And the Army has the capability to set up field hospitals in tents. That we go in and we practice and practice. You could put up a tent that has fully functional operating rooms out of a tent.
Amazing.
I see some other unmuted mics. Herb or Ethel, did you have a question?
I wanted to know if she was trained to have a weapon. I know she didn't use it, but were you initially, like in basic training, trained?
No, chaplains are not. The standard has gotten even more strict. When I was very young in my career, I would go with the soldiers to the firing range when they were qualifying on their weapons, and then at the end they would say, if there was some ammo left, oh, chaplain, do you wanna try and fire? And then as the standard became more strict, you were not allowed to even touch a weapon. I will say that when I was in Afghanistan, one time the one and only time I've had a Jewish chaplain assistant, Fred Cohen. He was fabulous. We just laughed our way through Kuwait and Afghanistan. he did give me a little familiarization with the weapon because, you know, God forbid if something happened to him, I figured, you know, I better know how to pick it up and shoot back, and you know, I would deal with the IG after that.
All right. Henny Weiss, did you have a question?
So Rabbi, I can listen to you forever. You're informative, you're instructive, you're inspirational. Great.
Oh, thanks, Henny.
No,
It's great
go.
to see you, Henny.
Thank you.
I see 2 more mics. Barbara, did you have a question?
No, I'm fine. I'm in awe of this lady.
Awesome. And then last, I don't have a name, but it says iPad 5. If you had a question. Oh, I see who it is. It's Phyllis. Phyllis Weinstein, did you have a question?
No, I didn't. I just enjoyed the program.
Phyllis, it's so nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Better.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. You look great.
Thank you.
All right. Awesome. So thank you so much, Rabbi Koppell.
All right. Thank you all. So nice to see everybody.
Just to quickly bring everyone up to speed on